It's a big week in Ottawa as a new session of Parliament kicks off. It's Prime Minister Carney's very first, and it will all get started with a big bang when King Charles reads the speech from the throne. A rare sight indeed. Joining us now are co-hosts of the podcast Beyond a Ballot, Rachel Siegel and Amanda Alvaro. Ladies, thanks so much for making time for us today, and great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having us.
Parliament is back this week, first time in 2025. It's only going to be sitting for about a month. There is a ton on the agenda. Amanda, I'd like to start with you. What do you foresee being the Carney government's priorities while they have MPs in their seats on the Hill?
It's hard to believe that we're almost 6 months into the year and Parliament is just going back into session. It feels like so much has happened already. He has telegraphed a lot of what to expect in this first month. He said legislation that he is looking to introduce before Canada Day, of course, before July 1st. He already signed an order of first cabinet meeting, and that was around the middle class tax cut. That's probably the most anticipated piece of legislation to reduce the taxes of the 22 million Canadians who pay federal income tax. We're also expecting them to table legislation around eliminating the inter-provincial trade barriers. So we expect that to happen. So as you can imagine, with only 4 weeks, that's a lot of legislation to get in the books.
Rachel, do you expect that legislation is going to make a lot of progress in those 4 weeks, or is it mostly just getting the paper down and getting it introduced?
Well, I think that the Carney government is hoping that it makes a lot of progress because he has committed to that July 1st timeline. And so I think that we are in a moment of national unity. There are things like the tax cuts that the Conservatives love. And so we'll see how they play that one out in terms of passing those bills. Unfortunately, there's no budget being passed during this session. And that came as a surprise to us last week. It's something that I think a lot of Canadians would have liked to have seen, given the economic uncertainty that we are currently in. And I think that this session will be very quick and hopefully very fruitful, although we don't know yet because we're not totally sure what the dynamic with this minority government will be. So when we measure new governments, we often measure them by the first 100 days. After this session, by the time Mark Carney comes back to Parliament, he'll be at day 140 of being Prime Minister. And so when we compare that to other leaders that have set priorities for those first 100 days, we'd like to think that hopefully having Parliament sit for a couple of weeks now will be fruitful, so that at least we see something come out of this sitting.
Amanda, what do you think the logic is in traditionally, they don't sit through the summer, but with Pierre Poilievre promising that, with Mark Carney saying, I'm a get it done Prime Minister, it's going to happen fast, we're on, the lightning speed train to success. What do you think the reasoning was with deciding to only sit for 4 weeks?
Well, it's kind of interesting because if you think about imposing this superficial deadline, this kind of 30-day deadline, we have a lot to get done, and Canadians are expecting us to get it done because it's going to prove to deliver a middle-class tax cut. It can also put $200 billion back into the Canadian economy through the interprovincial trade barriers annually. These are things that Canadians voted on. They're things that matter to Canadians. It's going to be incumbent upon the opposition parties to come to the table to recognize that Canadians are really looking to move some of these priorities ahead, and whether or not they're going to take the position of being obstructionist or whether they're going to get behind both of those initiatives.
Well, and speaking of that, Rachel, what do you expect we're going to see of how the Conservatives present themselves now that they've sort of gone off to lick their wounds a little? They seem to be softening the image a bit in public, but a lot of the same people are still in power behind the scenes and in Parliament. What do you think we're going to see from, well, it won't be Pierre Poilievre because he doesn't have a seat, so he's not in Parliament, but from Andrew Scheer and the Conservatives who are in Parliament?
Well, I think, they're sitting across from a front bench that looks largely the same as the Liberal government that we just saw under Justin Trudeau. And so what I think that the Conservatives will spend the summer doing is really trying to listen to Canadians. Pierre Poilievre already coming out trying to talk about why the economy is broken and looking at that in depth over the summer. And so I think what we'll see in the next couple of weeks is some working together, trying to pass pass some of those important measures like the tax breaks, but at the same time holding the government to account. Interestingly, they'll also have to elect a speaker this week, and so we're watching to see who that speaker will be and how that will play out in terms of the very tight numbers we're seeing in the House right now.
So, Amanda, do you think that means less of a sure thing the speaker is a liberal in this case, or are we still going to see that minority government, but still a significant minority?
Yeah, I mean, listen, when you only have 2 or 3 seats to make up, maybe there's some room there, but every single vote counts. And we know how difficult the last session of Parliament was. It was almost impossible to move anything forward. So I think they're going to be looking for each of those seats. And obviously, all of this is under the shadow of a massive trade war and the priority that that presents of unifying the Canadian economy and putting it first. So I think that I would like to believe that there will be more goodwill in this session of Parliament than we saw in the last, given that things have shifted so much economically, globally, and that there's a new foe, and that foe is President Donald Trump, and our ability to really come out as unscathed as possible through this, really terrifying trade war.
One last question that I want to put to both of you. The Prime Minister still doesn't have a permanent chief of staff. This is not particularly common at this point since he's been elected. He's an interim chief, Marco Mendicino, staying on through the summer. Rachel, what does that say to you?
It says to me that Mark Carney thinks that he can lead things the best himself. And, we've seen that in a lot of his commentary on his previous roles. And maybe he believes that he's the best decision maker in the Prime Minister's office, being the Prime Minister. But again, like you said, this is very strange that he wouldn't have somebody that's kind of leading the way in terms of policy direction and leading the team in the PMO. But Prime Minister Carney has not followed the rules on a lot of things, and that's been kind of interesting. We saw the mandate letter singular that came out this week, and the fact that he didn't give every minister a mandate, he gave a cabinet a mandate, and so he's kind of doing things himself. The question is he overstepping? Is he doing too much himself, or is he taking advice from the people around him? We're going to have to wait and see as we continue to define who Mark Carney is as a Prime Minister.
Amanda, final word to you.
Yeah, I kind of like that he's doing things a little differently, whether it's, having King Charles deliver the speech from the throne next week as Parliament resumes, or, some really unconventional and interesting choices for cabinet. Extending the chief of staff position to Marco Mendicino through the summer, I think, was a wise choice, given all of these trade discussions and negotiations that are happening with Trump. We have the G7 just around the corner. So with so much in flux, and with the decision of this government, I think, to really focus on the priorities, makes sense to kind of keep things steady, keep a steady hand, have Marco Mendicino at the table, because he's been there through this transition as they look toward the fall and introducing the budget then.
Beyond a Ballot ladies, co-hosts, thank you so much for coming on the show and walking us through what to expect.
Thanks, Mercedes.
Thanks for having us.